Our keynote speaker today is Ellen Remmer. Some of you may have seen her interview in the March Tatler magazine. Ellen is a philanthropist in her own right through the Remmer Family Foundation, which funds research and programs focused on helping at-risk pre-adolescent and adolescent girls. She is also one of the USA's leading philanthropic advisors. As President and CEO of Boston-based Philanthropic Initiative, Inc., Ellen works directly with families, foundations and others to help private donors set and achieve their philanthropic goals. She's also written extensively on the topic of women in philanthropy, and it is with great pleasure that I hand you over now to Ellen.
Good morning, thank you. It's just delightful to be here. I arrived in Northern Ireland on Sunday, and I have been immersed in philanthropy for the last few days and felt extremely welcome here. It's been great. One of the things that I have learned in the few days is that the term being a philanthropist is not a comfortable label for many people, and certainly not for many women. So I hope that I can change that a little bit this morning. And I also want to say that I am just delighted to be here at this inflection point, this celebration of women's philanthropy in Ireland. And I'm excited to see what happens in the years ahead. So my life as a philanthropist actually began with sock puppets. You know what I'm talking about, those little things where you sew things on. And I really, I think I got hooked on the whole idea of giving to others and contributing to others by sitting at the kitchen table when I was about 6 or 7 years old with my mom and my sisters, and we were making gifts for poor kids whose Christmas mornings wouldn't be like our own. From sock puppets and many similar projects to help my mom's work in the junior league, I'm sure there's something equivalent here, I moved on to visits to nursing homes and town cleanups and tutoring young kids in inner city schools through my school, hosting events on feminism. And throughout this journey into adulthood and definition of self, I was lucky enough to have very philanthropic parents, and they were great role models, they were moral guides, and they were cheerleaders. I went on to a school that happened to really celebrate service and activism and giving back. And so I embarked upon my working life determined to change the world, which I soon discovered was a little harder than it looked. So I took a foray into business, went to business school, and spent about 10 years in a consulting firm in business. Wasn't quite where I belonged, but I learned a lot about the importance of the market economy and appreciated its vital importance to democracy, prosperity, and innovation. I learned how to read financial statements, which is a really good thing to know. Today, I am a passionate missionary for personal, family, community, and corporate philanthropy. I figured out along this journey of life was civic engagement and philanthropy and making the world a better place is what certainly gives me meaning in life. So I'm lucky enough to spend my professional career promoting ambitious, engaged, and strategic giving with others. And in my spare time, doing philanthropy alone, with my husband, with my kids, with my sisters. And where my strongest passions lie, though, are in the areas of women and family philanthropy. I am an unabashed Pollyanna optimist, and I actually believe in the power of women's philanthropy to change our world. And I believe family philanthropy offers a very powerful avenue for cultivating the next generation of social investors and civic actresses. Deirdre gave a wonderful history of women in philanthropy, so I'm taking that out of my speech here because I think you actually did a terrific job talking about how early on, like in the 13th century, religious women of wealth founded hospitals and homes to assist the poor. And through those 700 years throughout the world, in Europe, certainly in the U.S., took on leadership advocating against slavery, taking care of orphans, building schools, building museums. They were hands-on, they threw their hearts and souls and time and generally inheritances into their projects. The tradition of women working together with other women also dates back to those times. And again, I don't know how the laws worked here, but in the U.S. it's kind of interesting to see how before the 1840s, married women basically could not own property independent of their husbands, and they couldn't sign contracts legally. So they associated together in order to actually make change. They had to associate together and form nonprofits. There they would have more rights than they would have individually. They could buy and sell property, and in fact, sign contracts and wield power. There was almost a parallel power structure being set up in the nonprofit world. So I date the modern philanthropist movement also to the 1970s, but in the U.S. we date it to when Gloria Steinem founded the Ms. Foundation, which we consider really the grandmother of women's funds. It was a very radical concept at that point. Now, 40 years later, there are about 150 women's funds around the globe. These funds did grow directly out of the feminist movement, and almost all of them are focused directly on helping other women and girls make structural changes in the status, welfare, and power of women. It's interesting because they grew very slowly for many years. I mean, they were just small amounts of assets. And then about 5 years ago, two remarkable sisters, Helen and Swanee Hunt, got frustrated. They said, how come the women's funding movement just continues to stay at this kind of marginal level? Everybody, has like $1 million in the fund, but we're not playing in the big games. So they challenged the women's funding movement to a major challenge grant and to raise $150 million in major gifts through a campaign called Women Moving Millions. And it was really a remarkable success. In a 3-year period, they surpassed their goals, raising $183 million from over about 100 donors to support 43 women's funds. It was really a remarkable show of how women could play big and be in the big time. Of course, the notion of collective women's giving has expanded well beyond women's funds to many different permutations. There's been the development of women's giving circles. We've had a huge explosion in the U.S., and I know some of that is happening here. There's been the development of women's philanthropy programs at United Ways, at community foundations, and even at universities. When my family first started transferring our family foundation giving down to Jacksonville, Florida, we were lucky enough to be there when the Women's Giving Alliance was just being formed at the community foundation there. So I've had the pleasure of watching that take off. I think that first year they had about 30 women. Each gave $5,000, some of that to go to giving currently to programs supporting women and girls, some of that to an endowment and long-term giving for women and girls, and some of it to administer the fund. Today, there's about 175 members and giving $5,000 a year, so they're giving over $500,000 of grants, and it happened in a very short period of time. Just been fabulous. There have been a few studies on giving circles in the U.S., and they've shown just huge growth. In fact, they really can't count them all. In the latest survey, they counted about 500, but I think there's thousands, in fact. And most of them, in fact, are formed by groups of women. Much like the women's funds, giving circles build on women's affinity for relationship. We like to come together. And once involved, the women are reaping incredible benefits. Again, the research has shown they're becoming more strategic philanthropists. They're giving more in philanthropy overall, and they're becoming more engaged in their local communities. And they're beginning to call themselves philanthropists.